We're discussing Syria. After international diplomacy came to yet another dead end, Russia and China blocked the latest attempt to pressure President Bashar al-Assad into halting the bloody crackdown on his own people. Well, something of a morale boost for al-Assad one day after several of his closest aides were apparently killed in a bomb attack in the capital. This is what we're discussing tonight. A reminder of our panel. Georges Sabra is a member of Syria's main opposition, the Syrian National Council. Also with me in the studio is Ziad Majed. He's a professor of Middle East Studies at the American University of Paris. In Washington, Robert Malley is director of the Middle East Programme at the International Crisis Group in Geneva. Professor Marwa Daudi is from Oxford University. And correspondent Borzou Daragahi is with us. He reports for the Financial Times. Well, a quick reminder of the events that all made us believe that regime of al-Assad was weakened. This is a quick look for you at Damascus. There has been fighting going on over the past 5 days in suburbs around the city. And there you can see the National Security Headquarters right at the seat of power. There was an attack there, reportedly an attack there yesterday. It appeared to have killed 3 close members of the regime, one of them being, of course, al-Assad's brother-in-law. 3 others in hospital, possibly dead as well. And it continues. Today we saw pictures of President al-Assad reportedly swearing in his new defense minister. Well, let's take a listen to the chief of the Free Syrian Army following that attack yesterday. Here he is.
I congratulate the heroes of the Free Syrian Army who were able to hit the fortress of this criminal and target the heads of this criminal regime. Soon we will be at the Republican Palace because the heroes who reach the den of these criminals will, God willing, get into the den of this criminal, Bashar.
All right, let's go back to Borzou Daragahi, who's reporting in Beirut for us. The rumour mill has really been in overdrive ever since that attack yesterday. We still don't know exactly what happened, do we? Whether it was a suicide bomb attack or whether it was a bomb that was planted. We've heard rumours that al-Assad's wife, Asma al-Assad, has gone to Moscow. We heard that al-Assad himself was injured and then he popped up in a video swearing in his new defence minister. There really is a lot of information and possibly misinformation going around at the moment.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories about who set the bomb, what happened. There's even one theory that these generals may have been killed earlier in a sort of palace counter coup some months ago, and that they decided at this moment to announce their deaths, pin it on the rebels in order to launch a ferocious counterattack on the creeping encroachment by the rebels on the capital. But, you know, it's really hard to tell if this was a sort of complicated fake propaganda operation. It's really going to backfire against the regime. At this point, it almost doesn't matter what happened, but the sort of propaganda value of this whole assassination is really giving a big morale boost to the rebels. There's amazing video on YouTube right now showing the rebels taking over one of the main border crossings in between Syria and Turkey, and this video very much looks like what happened in Libya with the collapse of the Gaddafi regime.
Ziad Majed.
Absolutely. I think the video is about between Syria and Iraq, if I'm not wrong, but it shows exactly this boost in the morale of the opposition. I just want to go back to one issue that was raised by Professor Dawoudi, I think. It's true that the revolution started as a peaceful one, and its militarization is only due to the brutality and to the massacres that the regime imposed on the peaceful demonstrators. But now we are in a new configuration. The military eye of the revolution is going still in parallel with the peaceful one. However, as much as the process of ending with the regime is fast, as much as we will avoid complications and complexities in the future, while if they will only continue to be on the defense, as she was saying, then the long-run conflict would invite new actors and would make Syria a scene of proxy wars. So far, we are still in a revolutionary context with violence, with resistance to the regime's brutality.
So you disagree with the International Red Cross that this is now a civil war?
Definitely, I disagree. The International Red Cross has to use a kind of terminology in order to justify ratify also any of its engagement. Geneva Conventions only allow the Red Cross to intervene, and the two protocols of 77 when there is a conflict. While we are in a revolution, all revolutions in the world do have some aspects of civil war, because any regime, even if it's very despotic, still have some social basis. So there is aspects of civil war, but it is a revolution. It's people calling for freedom and dignity, militarily or peacefully. It's them who choose how to react to the brutality of the regime. International community's responsibility is to support them. One example is not necessarily direct military intervention, not allowing any airplanes or helicopters, kind of no-fly zone would allow defections, because many of the soldiers in the showers and in the convoys avoid defecting because they are fearing the response of the helicopter. While if there is a no-fly zone, you can see a kind of an accelerated phenomenon of defections, especially in areas far from Damascus and from headquarters still loyal to the regime.
Robert Malley, what's your view on that? Is this a civil war, or are we still looking at an armed struggle in Syria? And how important is that distinction anyway?
I'm not sure it's that important. I mean, there are experts who could tell us when it tips into a civil war, when it's not. I don't know that it matters. We basically know what's happening. I think one dimension that hasn't been emphasized enough, and it's a very unfortunate one, is the sectarian dimension. It was manipulated, exacerbated by the regime, no doubt, but it exists, and so there is also that component of what's happening now. And if you look at the mapping of the hostilities and where the fighting is taking place, it makes perfect sense from a territorial sectarian point of view. And there is a good possibility that you're going to see Alawites fleeing towards the mountains in the west and trying to turn that into their stronghold, assuming the regime loses Damascus. And that obviously would portend very possibly tragic sectarian fighting and sectarian massacres. So I think we could talk about whether it's a revolution, a civil war, whatever it is, it also has this dimension. And it is becoming increasingly visible on the ground when you look at where the patterns of fighting take place, where the massacres have taken place. It does look at some level, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that there is an effort to carve out an area that will be the stronghold of the regime and of the Alawite community.
George Sabra, that's right, isn't it? There is a lot of sectarian division within Syria. Libya is often held up as the example of the Arab Spring that went right. We've now got a democratic election. But Libya doesn't have the sectarian divisions that Syria has. Even if Assad is out of the way, the SNC is in power. How will you keep the lid on all those simmering tensions?
We have a plan was issued in last meeting in Cairo for most groups of the opposition. It's a plan for a transition period, step by step. The first important thing for the security of the country. The second for the services to be continued as usual. And the third is for humanitarian aid for cities and villages, which everything collapsed in these villages. Also,
but the Sunnis will be the dominant power in Syria, won't they? If Assad goes and if your organisation comes to power.
We have a plan to choose. The first step to choose a leadership, local leadership for these villages, for these cities, to deal with the issues which present in front of them. And we have to issue also a special council by officers from the army and the security services and from civilians to control the situation.
But you can see, can't you, why people in Syria are worried and why they're still backing the regime of al-Assad. People like Christians, people like Alawites, wealthy merchants who have been propping this regime up for so long, they're frightened about what will happen once Assad is gone.
We understand if they worry, but why frightened about that? There is no foreigners inside Syria. We have still an army, Free Syrian Army, and the Syrian army itself. We have hundreds, but thousands of officers, national officers, still supporting the revolution, supporting Syrian people, even they inside the army, official army. So maybe you can understand to be worried, but not to frighten anymore.
What about comments made by the former Syrian ambassador to Baghdad earlier this week? He's been saying about the links between Al-Qaeda in Iraq and in Syria. How worried should people be about that?
I think it's not more new. And, nobody can insist about this issue. And
Marwa Dowdy, perhaps you'd like to come in on that.
Yes, I'd like to. I'd like to come back to the points made by two of your speakers about the militarization of the conflict. I did not say that the resistance should not be armed. What I said is one has to be careful about who is arming the resistance, where the weapons are coming from, and what agenda is coming with this armament, and which groups are benefiting from the armament. Of course, the Syrian people are resisting a very brutal regime, and they have to have the capacity first to defend themselves, and then they move on to an offensive strategy. The Libyan case, in my view, is not a good example, and for two reasons. First, the military intervention has created more than 100,000 civilian casualties in Libya. And second, the armed groups, despite the fact that the elections were positive in the sense that they overran the Islamist groups, you still have pockets of the country which are under the control of the armed groups, which refuse to return the arms. I don't think this is a promising scenario for Syria, and I would not like to see that happening in Syria. Second, the issue of sectarianism. Well, if you have weapons coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, that would bring with it, in the view of the population, a specific agenda, which is to counter somehow the Shia-Sunni divide in people's mind, and perhaps break the link between Syria and Iran, etc. My point is the armament should be dealt with from inside the country. The defectors are defecting and bringing with them their weapons. Of course, they're not heavy capabilities or heavy equipment. This is in the arms of the regime. However, they are deploying tactics which are part of an asymmetric conflict, which have proven in the last 2 days to be quite effective. In my view, in the long term, these are the tactics which will win the hearts and the minds of all of the population and allow for a peaceful transition. Whereas if you open the door, whereas to civil war or to armed conflict, whatever, having weapons being smuggled throughout the borders, military equipment being sent, etc., and perhaps foreign military intervention happening, safe zones have to be militarily enforced. So what does it mean? Sending troops on the ground? Who will be sending the troops? Will the Syrians agree to see Turkish or American or whatever troops on the ground? This is the issue. And I think the fact that the international community hasn't been fully involved so far has pushed the Free Syrian Army to find its own ways and tactics to win the battle.
Robert Malley, do you agree with that?
I think we could, to some extent, the internationalization has already occurred, and the consequences will have to be sorted out as time goes by. I think it would be naive to say that foreign intervention is not already occurring to some degree, but it happens in all conflicts. Again, whether we want to call it a civil war, an internal conflict, or a revolution. Obviously, outside parties. There have been a superimposition of different conflicts. There's the conflict between the people and the regime. There's also the conflict between regional actors. And there's also the conflict between international actors, Russia, the United States, and others. So we can't look at it in isolation, even though the driver today is going to be very much what happens on the ground.
Yeah, I think there is no case in history also that a revolution was capable, after defeating a dictatorship, to move smoothly into the reconstruction and to building a state without taking into consideration all the complexities, including in Syria and the Levant in general, the sectarian question. It's obvious that this will be a real challenge for the post-Assad phase. Assad regime that pretended being secular and progressive only worked on destroying the society from within and creating strong vertical divisions that were less present before Assad. So the question also of the minorities being frightened, I think they have to compare how they were before 1970 and how the situation is today, and who is responsible of 42 years of creating fears and divisions in Syria and around it. A second thing, I do not pretend or would like to say what should be done in Syria. Of course, it's up to the Syrian people to decide. They have tried the peaceful demonstrations. They have tried the militarization. opposition. If they consider that intervention is what they needed, it's up to them, of course. And I'm not sure also that the cost of interventions, even in Libya, is higher than what could have been the case if Gaddafi continued massacring his people. So I think there are always pros and cons for these kind of scenarios. But already, no one can fight a brutal regime that is heavily armed by Russia and supported by Iran without also counting on some support either from inside or from outside. And of course, everyone has agendas, but also the Syrians are capable of having their own agendas. And I think some people are working on it, even if it's very difficult, and it's not something that will be easy anyway in the coming years.
This regime already paranoid, now even more paranoid following events this week. A lot of people are frightened about us now entering a bloodier, more indiscriminate period of violence against the civilian population. How long do you think this regime can hang on?
You know, I think 16 months of real war from the regime against the people is more than enough to make a civil war if people want to enter that. And every massacre, believe me, it's enough also to make this kind of civil war. But Syrians consider what happened in the civil war in Lebanon and in Iraq. And they get very good lessons about that. So right now they refuse to enter this kind of war. But maybe during the transition period, we will face some problem. We understand that, but I think we have a good ability to deal.
But what will you do now? What will the SNC do now? What will your next move be, given the violence in Damascus that's going on right now, given what's happened at the UN Security Council? What is the action plan right now?
For the SNC? For
the opposition, yeah.
Yeah, especially after the fail of Security Council to deal with our issue, we depend upon ourselves. We organized the defense for the part of Damascus, which had been bombed for 3 days, last 3 days, in Al-Midan, Barzeh, Al-Qabun, by aeroplanes, chilling by bombs from the morning till evening. We get yesterday only 300 victims inside the city. Anyway, we think that the Battle of Damascus put the beginning of the end of this regime.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Georges Sabra, Ziad Majed, Robert Malley in Washington, Marwa Dowdy in Geneva, and Borzou Daragahi in Beirut. Thank you very much indeed to you all. And thank you to you for watching. That's it for tonight's debate. Stay tuned. More news and headlines coming up.